Today, I want to talk a little bit about sentence strips. I know that in your classroom, you probably have plenty of them. If you do, there's some really good tips that I'm going to give you today about using these sentence strips to help your writers, not only to frame up responses, but to add powerful vocabulary and sentence variety. So, in my classroom, a couple of things would happen. Kids would begin to do some writing, but they would write some pretty boring kinds of sentences. Things like, she had a black hat. She had black shoes. She had. And in my estimation, those were boring sentences. And I needed a way to help kids to really refine that a little bit. So what I did was I taught them how to use some sentence starters. Sentence starters that didn't just say, she had, or I saw. One thing that I did was I created some posters for my students. Each poster related to a different sense. And if I'm writing narrative, then each of those senses was on a poster, and you can see that there's lots of good sentence variety in there. But I have some students have a hard time accessing that information on a poster. So what I did was I took those sentence starters and I put them on sentence strips. This way, what I can do is I can give those sentence strips right to my students when we're working in some sensory language. They have the advantage of having the sentence starter right there on their desk so they can access the language. And if they want additional sentences, I can add that onto the sentence strips. Now, here's another thing that we can do with sentence strips that I think is really cool. We can color code them. So, when I'm working with sensory language, once again, and I want my students to be built into some independence, I don't want to be the one constantly feeding them this. What I do then, once I've taught them how to use those sentence strips, I color code them. So anything that relates to seeing might be in the color blue. Anything relates to something that we might smell, maybe I'll write it in the color red. And in this way, I have all of these color-coded sentence strips that kids can go over to the Writing Center and access independently. I just want to show you one teacher's way of organizing it. So you see that there are some sentence strips, they're color-coded, and that teacher put a little ring around them. That way, when kids are writing and they're doing some independent work, they can go to the Writing Center, pick the group of sentence starters that they want to use, take them right back to their desk, and get to work. If you're working in narrative writing, then that sensory language is really important. But what about if you're working in expository or opinion language? Well, the same concept can apply. And here's what I do there. If I'm working on response to text and it's expository, I might get some orange sentence strips. And I'd write the sentence starters out on those orange sentence strips. Once again, identifying the fact that that's a little different from the sensory language that was on the white sentence strips. That way my kids know immediately what sentence strips to go to, which ones they can begin to access all on their own as I teach them to use those sentence starters. Sentence starters are invaluable in my classroom. It helps kids to understand how a response can get put together. It gives them the language, the powerful language that they need, and that vocabulary that they may not possess just yet.